Good morning, everybody. I'm Harvey, and welcome to the CWJobs in association with techUK webinar. Tech Hiring 101, a look at the latest hiring trends. The session is going to be recorded and will be sent out after the webinar, so don't be furiously taking notes. You'll be sent the presentation. If you have any questions, please use the chat function in the corner. And similarly, if you have any tech difficulties, please let us know in the chat. So that's the kind of housekeeping out the way. If we move on to front and center on the agenda, we're going to be looking at the current state of the UK tech market, key trends, candidate activity, attraction, how do you maximize tech hiring, and hopefully some actionable advice to attract, hire and retain tech talent. There's also been, there were over 300 registrants, and there's been some questions from the audience as well. We'll try and get through as many of those as possible in the Q&A. If we don't, we're going to do something we haven't done before, which is in the next couple of weeks, a LinkedIn live session, and hopefully go through, look at the questions we didn't answer and send out some invites. And if you really want to get an understanding or answer or round back on some of the themes, hopefully we'll be able to cover those off in a later session as well, because normally we get through these and don't get time to finish them off. So hopefully that will be useful in the future as well. And I'm delighted to say I'm ably assisted by our panel, who I will get to introduce themselves. Kim, do you want to start?
I will, yeah, thank you so much. So my name's Kimberley, I'm a software engineer. I've been a developer for 9 years now. I've worked in a whole host of companies ranging from publishing houses to digital tech agencies and home automation companies. And I also run a charity called codebar that teaches programming to minority group members in tech. Excellent,
excellent. Nimmi, you're from techUK. For those of you who don't know techUK, we've been working with techUK for the past, I think it's 5 years now. Worked with an enormous amount of companies, large and small. And Nimmi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. And Dom, we do want people to take notes, active listening during this webinar, but I'm Nimmi Patel. I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK, as Dom mentioned. techUK is a tech trade association with over 900 members, of which CWJobs is a huge part of that. Really excited to be on this webinar today.
Great, and finally, our very own Zoe McFarlane. Zoe.
Hi, Zoe McFarlane, heading up data and insights actually across StepStone UK, so across the 11 different brands that we have. And my role really across the organisation is to bring the wealth of data that we have from thought leadership, from social and candidate data, and from market and traffic data to organisations to help them make quicker and hopefully better talent decisions.
Thanks, everybody. And yeah, Nimmi, to your point, absolutely agree. Just mean furiously taking down everything that's on the slide. You'll be able to hopefully access that afterwards anyway. But yeah, notes, do what you need to do. That's great. So let's crack on. I'll just give an overview, I suppose, of what's happening out there. So when surveyed by YouGov and Tech Nation, 64% of tech employees believe their tech skills are essential to job security. It's hugely important, as we all know, and it's well recognised by tech employees. In the UK jobs market, nearly 3/4 of tech teams have been left with crippling skill shortages and as the pace of technological advancement outpaces skill development. And I think we can look at our own companies and know that's the case, because there's always something new coming on board. Nearly 2/3 of organisations are struggling with retention. That's a massive issue. If you've got a hole at the bottom of the bucket, doesn't matter who you're bringing in, you're continually trying to fill that up. So that's another challenge, which I'm sure the audience is well aware of. And nearly 1.3 million roles were vacant between March and May 2022. This is a 20,000 increase from Q1 2022. An increase of 500,000 on pre-pandemic levels. So it goes to show the level of desperation that people are having internally. When we look at candidates and candidate preferences, 79% of candidates prefer scheduling interviews via text. I mean, I think that this is something that is not well recognised. Text, WhatsApp, that way of interacting with this audience seems to be extremely relevant. So probably something worth bearing in mind. Maybe even above email, but you've got that speed and pace with a text, so that's really preferred by candidates. And 204%, that's the figure that Gen Z candidates are likely to engage with an employer when they perceive the hiring process is fair. So I think as far as presenting your company, presenting your process is really, really important to this increasing generation as they're coming through. So that's definitely worth bearing in mind. And this final point that I'll make, 90% of tech leaders have been asked by a candidate about the organization's impact. Impact, what does that mean? D&I strategy, CSR, corporate and social responsibility. And I think sometimes on surveys, it can be a box, is this of interest to you? Yeah, it's of interest. That's kind of a hot topic. But actually, hearing it from tech leaders that they've been asked by a candidate, and 90% of candidates have asked this, or 90% of tech leaders have been asked for it by a candidate. I think that really shows the reality that it's not just a tick box exercise and surveys. This is actually happening out there. So really, really important, I think, that interviewers and tech leaders know their CSR, know their DE&I strategy, know what their impact is on the wider world, and that really excites candidates. As you can see there, information security, really, really, really hot topic for companies to bring on board. But the hardest roles, architecture, leadership, and cloud and infrastructure, still very, very difficult to get hold of. And I suppose, Nimmi, with your view of the market from techUK, does this chime with what you're seeing and hearing out in the market at the moment?
Definitely. So we recently did a survey called the Digital Economy Monitor, and it showed that businesses really aren't able to recruit the digital skills that they need, with over 30% of techUK members highlighting that better training and skill support is needed to ensure that the sector continues to grow. It's, we're looking a lot to, access to overseas talent, but there's so much more that we can do to support people in the UK who we know are there, who may have the skills but aren't necessarily applying, or don't feel like they can work for a certain organisation to do more in this space.
And is there a reticence from employers, would you say, Nimmi, to invest in that training? Because it's suddenly, the thought that it's going to be superseded by another technology or another piece of kit that's going to come in, or are they very happy to do that and recognise that?
I think most organisations recognise that they need to invest in training, but due to the cost of living crisis and the cost for businesses right now, it might be quite low down on the list. But we can't think about short-term solutions and not, I just think that creates more problems while we're not focusing on the longer term. I think there's more that we should and can do, but essentially it's a tough time right now for everyone, right? So it's just about making sure that companies are able to find out the information they need for training facilities that may be available to them at little cost or no cost at all.
Well put, well put. So if we move to the next slide and talking a little bit more in depth about that tech hiring demand, Zoe, do you want to explain this in a little bit more depth?
Yeah, so looking at as you say, the tech hiring demand, the job vacancy trends, and looking specifically sort of across CWJobs data here, the positive news, I suppose, is despite those record high levels of demand from recruiters across the market, is that actually candidates are seemingly coming back online. So average applications per vacancy, for example, continue to recover strongly as we move throughout the course of 2022. If you compare year on year, what we're really seeing is you can expect 2/3 more candidates now applying to roles than you could at this same time last year. So from conversations in my role with a lot of organisations across this sector, what we're consistently hearing is, yes, market conditions, yes, cost of living is having an impact, particularly on the lower end of the pay scale for some of the roles. But actually, we're also hearing really that it's candidate confidence that's really driving a lot of these applications now. So people are perceiving it's a safe and a stable time to move within the industry. Tech itself has weathered quite a lot of storms over the past few years, and it's getting itself a bit of an insurance type reputation of a safe port in a storm, essentially, as we go through potentially some more economic challenges. When we look at regions in particular, we know that the Southeast is always incredibly strong across tech, but we see, for example, 161% increase in applications or average applications for East Anglia. We've also seen increases of a minimum of 70% across the Southeast, East Midlands, Yorkshire and the Northwest as well. So we are seeing that kind of growth spreading its way a little bit further across the UK than maybe if we were having this conversation in 2019, it would have been doing. And when we look at it again from a specialist role perspective, you can see on the slide there, network analysis is up 211%, for example. But we've also seen kind of business intelligence roles, web design, web development, and generalist software development have all also increased by a minimum of 130% over the same period as well. So it's a competitive time to be a candidate in this market. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there is more interest out there, but I know that our traffic teams are having to work 2-3 times as hard to get that interaction with applications. So I think the appetite and candidates are definitely looking, but it's about snaring the interest and getting them to actually apply for that role, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And just a little bit more background on the sub-discipline trends then, Zoe.
Yeah, so if we start firstly with the chart on the left, just to navigate what we're looking at, I suppose, when we say the top 3 sub-disciplines, what we really mean is the 3 disciplines within the tech space that have the most recruiter demand, the most job postings across the wider market. So no great surprises, I'm sure, to anybody on the call that software development has remained by far the largest bucket here and has remained really, really steady. We've seen a small increase across infrastructure. We've seen you know, a lot more of those kind of networking infrastructure security roles being brought domestic into the UK because of various global situations, but we've also seen a small decrease for support roles, which we weren't necessarily expecting to see. So kind of probing with, again, a lot of our different customers and organizations, what we're seeing is that for some of those less specialist roles, companies are actually trying to balance that cost of hiring. So for example, support in this here versus outsourcing or looking at different ways they can work as a business to minimize that requirement. So when we look across those top 3, fairly self-explanatory, I think, but when we then look beyond that, what we also see in the market is decent growth within kind of database, web development and architecture again. On the right hand side now, if we look at CWJobs specifically, we've seen really marked increases in both postings. So we're calling that here ADLO. So a little bit of a CWJobs term, I guess. So I'll just explain that as average daily listings online. Basically, if you're a candidate, on average, you go on CWJobs, how many roles in that area could you expect to see on a given day? And we're also seeing the applications there year on year for business analysis and network analysis roles are jumping somewhat, with a marked increase as well in the web development roles. But I don't know if we wanted to go to the next slide. We've got a little bit more of a granular look just by job title specifically here. So what's interesting to see is there's actually some disparity between what recruiters are really, really desperately looking for, what organizations are needing from a skills perspective, and what candidates are interested in, or where there's a larger candidate pool of those skills already existing. So you'll see, for example, on the left hand side, 3 of the most in demand roles, so solutions architect, software developer and full stack developer, are not actually present at all in the top 10 in 2022 or 2021. And one of the reasons we think this is that one of the changes in candidate behaviour we've seen is a lot less umbrella searching and a lot more really specific niche searching for actually the skills they specifically have. So relatively gone are the days of people searching software dev, software engineer, or even a company name. We're now starting to see significantly more searches for product names, for languages, for specific skill sets that those candidates have, because they know they're in the driving seat and they're getting the reaction from the market when they do that. So they're being a lot more nuanced in their searching behavior. So it's an interesting time, I guess, of how do you balance having a broad term to capture as much of that organic traffic as you can without risking the relevancy of actually how are candidates searching and how are they behaving and how are they expecting you to show up to the market.
Yeah, it's really tricky to decide on what angle to take, isn't it? Because do you go for low applications which are absolutely spot on, or do you have a little bit of bandwidth whereby you could take somebody that wasn't quite right, but you think that if they've got the industry knowledge, that you could spend a bit of time getting them up to speed. So it is a balancing act, as you say.
Yeah, and I think it really varies organisation to organisation. So we see, I won't name them, but we see some organisations, for example, people are searching for their name, for their brand identity, and so actually probably does it matter that much? No, they're going to land on that careers portal. Versus once you are kind of getting to an organisation where maybe you're not immediately front of mind from an employer brand perspective for the candidates, it's yeah, as you say, it's balancing the two. And maybe even sort of A/B testing, which of the two work for your specific roles and for your resourcing as well.
Kim, from your point of view as a developer, looking for roles, what way would you prefer? Would you prefer to be able to put in absolutely drilled and only have 2 listings, or do you prefer to have a broader scope to give you more choice, I suppose, and then drill down from there?
It depends, which is a really rubbish answer to give, but typically I would look for something more specific, because the word software engineer or software developer is so broad, and actually the skills needed to be a software developer really varies between the company. Like some companies will expect certain things, some companies will expect another, but for example, my discipline is, JavaScript, React, and React Native. Those are the terms that I would probably put in, because software developer is so broad that if within that term they're a pretty small company, they may also expect me to do some DevOps, AWS stuff, which I wouldn't know. So for me, more specific searches will get me the results that I want, and that could be my fault, or it could be the company's fault for their not great job ad. But yeah, nowadays it would be a more specific search for me.
But by the sound of it, giving you some real context, if it is slightly broader, giving you some real context in actually what you'd be doing on a daily basis, so that limiting the surprise and risk, as it were, of going into the interview and finding out it's completely wrong, or even getting to the point of doing the job, I suppose.
Or if they're happy to take me on, knowing that I don't know a particular thing, but happy to train me up, that would be great. But that may not then be put in the job ad, so I may not apply, because I don't think that, oh, there's 2 things in this job ad that I don't know. Will I get the support to learn these? If that's not specified, I probably won't apply. Yeah,
and there's that gender point as well, isn't it? That, I'm not saying necessarily yourself or women, but women kind of look at something and find the things that they haven't got, rather than oh, don't worry about that, I'll apply for it anyway, and I'll showboat about it. So I think if you're looking for that diversity piece, giving that opportunity or talking about the training, do you think that actually works, Nimmi, or do you think that that's trying to make it clear to applicants that if you haven't got this area, we can train you on that? Do you think that people are hearing that when they're writing job ads or trying to recruit?
It's so important that employers put that down in their job ads and job specs, that they are willing to train, that they're willing to support. I think it's all about making sure that applicants feel like they're going to be supported through every stage of not only the application process, but when they get the job as well. Super important, yes, is the answer to that.
Okay.
through codebar quickly on our job board, well, I see a lot of jobs that say required skills and then this huge list. And then when I say, well, are all 8 of these required? And they're like, oh, no, like actually really only 2 of them are important. And so I'll say, okay, well, can we just change the wording? So have the required skills with 2 and then nice to have, and then list the rest. And just that small change on a job ad can have a huge impact on someone like me, who's 9 years into my career, let alone someone who's coming into the market having, no industry experience. That small change can make such a difference.
So I suppose the takeaway from it is for the audience that are primarily going to be recruiters in-house or recruitment consultants, is to have a really, really good understanding of what is required, rather than just accepting the list that's come through from the program manager or something like that, and actually finding out and making that clear on the advert, rather than just cut and paste, dropping it in and getting a real feeling for it is really important from the sound of it. More detail and more understanding of it, rather than making it a process to get it off your desk, I suppose, which we're all guilty of on occasion. Okay, if we move to the next slide. So this is talking about the regional trends. Unsurprisingly, as Zoe was mentioning, London accounts for 73% of all applications and 44% of all average daily listings online, that ADLO phrase, which is exactly the same proportion as last year almost. We noticed a small increase in postings in London of about 10% in East Anglia compared to 2021. But the Southeast is the second best performing region, with a small increase in postings in 2022. So overall, going back through this entire thing, are there any surprises in this? Would you have expected, say, the regional hubs to have increased, or do you think that that's just increasing in line with London? Anything that kind of stands out for you? No.
I'm surprised London isn't a little bit less this year, just given how many people I know have left London because now they can work remote. They're looking to live elsewhere. So I'm just surprised that London isn't like a bit smaller than previous years.
Do you know something funny that I hear anecdotally from a lot of our customers is that essentially you get the chart on the right a little bit now for remote and hybrid working because of the chart on the left. So we get a lot of organizations who, and we obviously recommend against doing this, but a lot of organizations who put the role as London or Southeast based when it's remote, because they know that's where the bulk of the applications are. So it's sort of this weird perception piece actually of, not only are people moving away and maybe they're remote or hybrid, but you've got a lot of London organizations that technically the role's in London because you have to go 1 day a month or 1 day a fortnight. So there's that piece as well, I think, that's creating a slightly false positive on the London front.
Yeah, because you would be capable of working from your Leeds house or whatever, but it's based out of London and you'd be expected to go down there once a month or whatever. So do you think that the remote working piece is still a challenge or a positive? And that's open to everybody, I suppose. A challenge or a positive in terms of recruitment, because some people are wary that things may change, or it might get dialed back, or it might get dialed forward. How are people feeling about working remotely? I suppose it's open to everybody, really. Zoe, you're not based in the UK, and obviously it's got to be remote for you, I'd imagine, most of the time. Do you see that as a problem for hiring people like yourself?
Did you mean Kimberley there?
Sorry, Kimberley.
I love working remote, and every person I know who works remote loves working remote, because you have the freedom to, do that gym class in the morning before work. Whereas, when I was in London, I used to spend an hour and a half of my day commuting, and that's a huge chunk of the day to be sat on the tube. And I used to get through a lot of books and podcasts. I do think, though, for me, I would like an office to be able to have the option to go in, because there are times, like I said, I've just got a dog, and it would be amazing to be able to escape for a day to go to an office. So I do think having like a bit of a hybrid is actually the ideal situation, but giving people that option. You know, I know people who are parents that really appreciate being able to stay at home so that, you know, during the lunch they can, you know, go for a little walk, or, you know, they can dip out for an hour to pick up their kid from school. And so I think having that freedom and option, I think, is the best solution. But I love working remote, and I have done for about 5 years now.
I definitely agree with Kimberley. Flexible working in its broadest form, so not just remote or hybrid, but like compressed hours, job shares, it really makes it much easier to match employers to the skills that they need, because they're accessing wider talent, pools of talent that they may not have accessed before. I think it makes a huge difference, especially in the tech sector, to highlight that in job adverts. I think we're very lucky in this industry where flexible working has been more widely accepted, even prior to the pandemic. But there's a lot of kind of statistics around how people feel like they're more productive from working from home. But like Kimberley said, it's all about that flexibility. And it's really encouraging to see a lot of companies, senior leadership teams take advantage of that, as long as that message trickles down to managers and middle managers, so that their employees and their colleagues feel comfortable working, taking advantage of flexible working and working remotely.
The Tech Talent Charter, which CWJobs are also a member of, do a survey every year to look at diversity within the workforce. And there seems to be an uptick in women in the workforce from about 18% to 21, 22%. Would you, Nimmi, in your role particularly, in the overview you had with this, would you have expected that to be higher, or do you think it's going to be quite a long journey? And is this remote working helping or hindering, would you say?
So I think it's a bit of both. We're seeing obviously the advantages and disadvantages of that. You know, flexible working can bring in people who companies haven't decided to engage with before, such as persons with disabilities, those, you know, with neurodiverse tendencies, for instance. But also there's an idea of combating proximity bias, which is where you know, people who are in the office potentially could get promoted over people who are not seen to be in the office. And that has a true disadvantage to women, because already, and I can send you over some stats to the audience as well, almost 60% of women who work in hybrid environments feel like they've been excluded from important meetings. And a lot of the women who fear that simply asking for a more flexible work schedule will impact their chances for a promotion. So there are real advantages and disadvantages, but I think that's where, you know, the idea of really training managers to understand what an equitable hybrid workplace will look like and how to support people with different working styles. And I think we've had to do that, you know, across generations and across decades in terms of the ways in which people work. So it's a real issue to combat if you're seeing this happen across your workplace, even if it is in little areas. I think combating that kind of proximity bias will support with retention and will support with more diverse people applying for job roles.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because it certainly looks like it's going to be a bumpy road for the next 2 quarters economically. So if companies do tighten the belt and need to maybe release people, it's going to be a very, very difficult decision, isn't it? Because if people have done that presenteeism piece and been in the office, but they're not as good as somebody who works remotely, that's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out in terms of who is kept and who is moved on. And I think that would be the crunch point in how companies really believe in flexible working or not. So that remains to be seen, I suppose. Remains to be seen, and hopefully, you know, we'll ride it out with as minimal losses as possible. Okay, Zoe, you talked about the change in search activity a little bit earlier. Do you just want to go in a little bit more depth to that?
Yeah. So what we're looking at here, just to kind of again navigate. So when we say 100, we're really looking at 100%. So that being the most number of searches on Google for IT jobs or for generic job searches, and everything else is a percentage of that. So We're not implying that there's more tech job searches than any other UK job searches, just before we go on. But what we saw is after that large drop in candidate activity last year across the wider market that we've talked to, what we've now seen is that bounce in particular for IT job postings as we go into 2022. So even though the base numbers aren't that comparable, what we can see is that the recovery for the tech sector has been significantly better than the recovery for the overall generic job market. And as we say on CWJobs specifically, we've noticed a really steady amount of searches across the year, but they're really much more specific and much more nuanced, as we say. So the feeling that we really get is there's a lot more research that is going on before the job search is happening, whereas maybe typically before, the job search was the research that people were doing. So that starting line is just a little bit more sophisticated from a candidate perspective. You can see on the right hand side, as we've mentioned, kind of Java developer, data analyst, Scrum masters, and software devs are the searches that have increased the most over half one of this year. Pieces like IT support, cybersecurity, BA, PM remaining relatively stagnant, despite the fact that there are significantly more candidates online for those roles. So we can really see exactly as you actually said, Kimberley, people are going in and saying, I don't want, you know, back end, front end, full stack, 12 languages on the job ad. I actually want specifically what it is that I would be responsible for, and that granularity there as well.
And that says to me that there's an appetite for the right role, and people are looking, and it's down to the shop window, the advert, to really get them to make that move, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a great example of I think tech is, when we look at a lot of other sectors where candidates are quite passive, tech's almost a bit semi-passive, and always has been, where people are always looking at, got their eye on the market, got their eye on what might be coming, even if there's no real intention behind what they're searching for. And I think that's always been a thing. You know, a lot of people working in this industry are naturally very curious and very inquisitive, and they want to be working on and for the best thing for them. But I suppose what we've seen, a great example of what we've seen is, and the base figure is a 6-figure number because this percentage sounds a little bit silly, but when we see people looking at adverts, for example, on CWJobs, the move over to company profile pages, we've seen about 376% increase in people actually going onto the company profile page and researching further about the company before they apply, if you compare 2019 to 2021. So yeah, that's where, you know, it's a more nuanced search, and there's a lot more research happening before they're bothering to hit the apply button, essentially.
And I suppose it goes back to that tech hiring piece of the tech leaders being asked more about their company, more of what a candidate's getting into, because they may be there a little bit longer, or, you know, if they're going to move, it's got to be for the right role and got to be for a meaningful role. So everything leads to, the more information you've got out there, the better is what I would say, rather than whacking on a, you know, must-have skills and a huge base and that will do enough. It's got to be more detailed. I think that's what's coming through loud and clear.
Yeah, particularly the purpose piece. I think a piece of research that was undertaken early in the year, granted not tech specific, but did have a large tech component in it, showed that actually having a sense of purpose at work and in work has overtaken working with innovative products or innovative solutions in terms of candidate preferences. So people are actually more driven by the purpose and the societal impact of what they're doing than how shiny the tool is that they're working on.
Do you think companies are getting this, Nimmi? Are they understanding this clearly, or are they still, well, we are, I don't know, Unilever, plucking a name out of the air. Of course, everybody wants to work for us, whereas actually you have to detail what Unilever are doing, or any other company, what you are doing in more detail.
Definitely. I think, Dom, you and I spoke on a really fantastic CWJobs webinar. Was it earlier this year, last year? Time is an abstract and doesn't mean anything. But we spoke all about employer brands and how that impacts tech recruiting. And hopefully someone from the CWJobs team can pop that in the chat, but it was a really interesting and innovative discussion where we spoke a lot about how companies need to comprise clear values, behaviors and promises to highlight what essentially the organization stands for. And I think that's exactly what Zoe was talking about. We've seen really strong global brands, global employer brands, find it really difficult to source the talent they need simply because of the marketplace. And I think, it's really important to communicate what an organization stands for, and leverage that essentially. So yes, really important.
Yeah, I think that was with our friends over at Universum, who are employer value proposition experts. And in fact, they've got some new information coming out very shortly concerning exactly this. I think we might revisit that later in the year. But okay, so if we move on to the next slide, this is data from the confidence index, which we did earlier this year. It's with 1,500 IT professionals, 1,000 workers and 500 decision makers. It's our fourth one. The timing was perfect in terms of difficult situations, because we had Brexit, then we had COVID, then we had coming out of COVID, and now we've got cost of living crisis and what's going on in the east of Europe. So very interesting to see how these are fluctuating. When you look at the cost of living crisis and then apply the 57% of tech workers expect their salary to increase in the next 12 months, one side of the equation is not going to be happy on this, are they? Because employers with increasing stresses on costs are either going to be squeezed even harder, or they're going to say no and potentially lose candidates. But I think it's definitely worth highlighting that and recognizing that's going to be a tough conversation in the coming months. 24% of tech workers feel they deserve a promotion in the coming year, whilst on the other side, 23%, as it says there, senior leaders are planning to increase pay, but that doesn't sit with the 57%. But 30% of leaders plan to offer pay increases to help combat the cost of living crisis. So it's going to be an incredibly interesting year in terms of how that plays out and what the tech workers want and what they're able to get. And I think that it may not be down to the tech department, as usual, it's going to come down to what's in the purse to pay out to these things, to pay out to the people.
Dom, I'm surprised that 30% of senior leaders planning to offer pay increases to help combat the rising cost of living isn't actually higher, because obviously we've seen such a huge need to retain such talent, and surely it would be cheaper to offer pay increases than to recruit someone else. But maybe Kimberley and Zoe can come into this.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and I think actually relating a little bit to what Dom said there, is that there's a real squeeze specifically on salaries within the tech market. So actually, if you look across the board in the UK, 2/3, you've got 57% of tech workers expect a salary increase over the next 12 months. 2/3 of all workers in the UK expect no pay increase over the next 12 months. So it's almost the polar opposite in terms of expectations. But you've got talent teams who are advising back to the business, but actually that money's got to be spread across the board. We are seeing a massive increase in reactive counter offers, for example, that are going on, which wouldn't, that not necessarily that sustainable and wouldn't kind of land into that offered pay increase piece. But what we're seeing is a little bit of a return to, for a lot of organizations, what happens if we don't have someone in IT support versus we don't have salespeople? And it's that balancing act of actually how do we keep driving the business forward that we got to pre-pandemic, right? Where it got to that pinch point of actually, well, just like HR, IT drives a lot of businesses. You can't actually keep on selling or marketing or doing or manufacturing or whatever you do without them. But I think it's that misalignment between actually how tech workers value themselves and what they know they add to an organization and what organizations maybe consider that value to be, if that makes sense.
And I think the interesting thing as well is that this is an opportunity for a lot of companies, because pure tech businesses have had a tough time with the tech bubble bursting recently, so they are not hiring as hard. They're not applying as much pressure onto that talent pool, and it's a chance for other businesses which maybe weren't so attractive because they weren't getting the investment that tech startups maybe were getting. It's a chance for them to catch up, and it would be terrible for them to kind of actually do the reverse and hemorrhage those skills that actually they're probably behind the curve on. I suppose over to you, Kimberley, in terms of is the big company coming back into vogue, or is it more about being with a quirky startup that maybe is a bit of a risk? Is that risk piece being involved when developers are looking now?
Yeah, I think at the moment, like having salary security is such an important thing at the moment. You know, there is the financial crisis. Everything is like the cost of everything is going up, and you know, a startup is risky, but it depends, because some people really like that risk. You know, some people like the fast-paced life of a startup, so it does come with a risk. But from what I'm seeing amongst, you know, the developer friends I know, security with a bigger company at the moment is key. And I know some people who have even taken a bit of a pay cut to have that security, which I was quite shocked at. I was like, oh, like, that they were like, well, you know, that having that financial security every month was key for them.
Yeah, I mean, let's face facts. COVID was a bit of a shock, wasn't it? That,
yeah,
I mean, things are not.
But I am seeing a lot of big companies, you know, hiring freezes at the moment that I wasn't, you know, that I was surprised at. You know, with codebar, you know, we speak to a lot of companies, particularly who are training, you know, junior developers. You know, our goal is to get them into tech. And actually, when I've been having those conversations with these bigger companies, they're on a hiring freeze across all of their tech departments. So they're even worried at the moment. You know, they're like, well, we need to kind of keep the talent that we've got and just keep ourselves going, rather than, you know, adding more risk to themselves by hiring more people.
Entirely understandable, I suppose, given the uncertainty that we're looking at. But that does segue beautifully into the next slide, which is what do tech workers want? Unsurprisingly, flexible working, hugely attractive still. Mental health benefits, clear progression, and still, you know, 26% aspiring to work with leading technology. The other points in there, healthcare becoming really important as well. Healthcare benefits, the strong company values and ethics is up there at 23%, and transparent pay at 20% as well. With the cost of living crisis intensifying, half of employees feel their company should be more mindful of their financial situation, and 47% more mindful of their mental health. This seems to be coming through loud and clear, along with the whole DE&I piece. The mental health, how difficult is it for clients to understand the mental health piece, would you say, Nimmi? I mean, and to actually make something meaningful for employees? Is this something that you get involved with alongside the DE&I? Does it help with DE&I if you get this right?
Of course, I mean, essentially supporting your staff with mental health benefits is a retainment strategy more than D&I, because you're showing and you're creating an environment where staff feel like they can openly talk about mental health, and they can openly go to you know, HR with any sort of issues, or their line managers. I think people have realized that we're quite fragile, and you only realize how good your company support is once you're going through something quite tough, or you know someone who's going through something quite tough. And since the pandemic, people and companies have been really treating mental and physical health as equally important as they should, right? It's so important that stuff like this is highlighted in job adverts, but also reiterated throughout someone's career, saying, you know, encouraging a positive mental health, or like encouraging positive mental health awareness workshops, you know, having that kind of training, appointing champions, the way we do with fire safety, for instance. It's just as important, and it's just as crucial to keeping people healthy and happy at work. I think the level of pastoral care has changed since the pandemic. It's just a shame it you know, cost a pandemic to really get us to this place, but it's in employers' best interest to support their staff in this way.
I think to add as well, I think not just saying it, but doing it is important as well. I remember joining a company, it was 5 years ago, and I was about 3 months in, and our tech lead, we were about to join our stand-up and we were virtual, and he put in Slack, I'm actually not going to join stand-up today, I'm having a really bad mental health day, I'll see you all at lunch. And that was all it took for me to know that I can also say something if I'm having a bad day. And so having your leaders and your managers and the C-suite people talking about it and demonstrating it and being open and saying, you know, actually I'm having a bad day, so do you know what, I'm going to skip stand up, I'll see you at lunch. Or, you know, so that demonstration and that example was what it took for me to go, do you know, if I'm having a bad day, I'm in a team where I know it's safe to say that, because my tech lead is demonstrating that it is a safe space to say that. And I think that's the key thing as well, is not just saying it on job ads and saying, oh, we support this, but actively demonstrating it to your team is so key.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the other point as well about transparency with HR and knowing it's the first time I've thought about just being able to speak to your HR department and believe in your HR department, helping with your mental health, because it takes the weight and burden off. No, if something bad happens, I know it will get sorted. And that is can have a huge impact on retention, not just talking about mental health, but as a retention piece that you mentioned, Nimmi.
And people talk as well, like developers talk. So like, you know, developers have conversations of like, oh, I'm interviewing at this company, what are they like? Like we do. And if I hear something bad, or if I've heard a woman's had a bad experience at a company, I'm going to tell other women that. And I'm just going to say, go to this interview, but be aware I know someone who had this experience. So in that situation, like I say, with my tech lead, you know, I'll then say to people, actually, like, this is a really good place to work. They're really open about mental health. It's totally fine to take days off or mornings off if you're not feeling great, or, you know, to go for a walk. So we talk. And I don't know, sometimes other companies are aware that us developers do talk about experiences that we've had, particularly women, you know, because we want to know that if we're joining a company, we are going to be safe. Being the first of anything in a company or in a team, you know, when I've been the first female developer on a team, that's hard. So you're going to ask other female developers if they've been at that company and what it was like. And if I've heard a bad thing, then I'm not going to want to interview there and I won't apply. So that reputation is important as well. Because we talk.
And one sends you on a trajectory of increasing gender equality, and the other one is incredibly toxic to it, isn't it? Even if it's only on 10 to 20% of your applicants have had, you know, a bad word in their ear about that particular company or workplace or manager, you know, so that's something to really look out for long term, I think, for all companies.
And particularly
I definitely think,
and particularly minorities, you know, if you're joining a company, you want to know that it's a safe space, so that if something happens, it's a safe space to raise that to your manager and something's going to happen. So that's so key. And that's about retention. You know, you can get the person, you can get this talent, but if then the workplace isn't set up for that, or there aren't processes in place, then you're going to lose that talent very quickly.
Yeah. You can sell the dream, but you've got to live it as well.
Yeah.
Great. So talking about hiring more efficiently, I mean, the kind of the takeaway piece, as it were, people that have been on these before will undoubtedly have seen some of this information, or people that haven't been here will know some of this information. But talking about hiring more efficiently, 39% of IT decision makers will put a stronger focus on tech hiring to remain as competitive as possible. I think that's totally understandable. Similar amount, better use of recruitment technology. Now that's easily said, much more difficult to implement within a business. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Only 30%, I thought this would be higher, nearly 38% of IT decision makers will focus on building diverse and equitable teams. I thought, given the wave of emotion that's come through on this in the last 3 years, this would be higher. I don't know, what are you surprised by that, or do you think actually that's pretty healthy?
I think that's pretty healthy because, you know, a lot of the companies that would have been surveyed probably already have measures in place to build diverse and equitable teams, so they might simply just not, you know, tick
fair enough
that they are in process of doing so, right? Unfortunately, sometimes it can be a tick box exercise, but I think that percentage is right, because often people don't see retainment measures as, you know, one part of building a diverse and equitable team. They could see measures, you know, to do pay transparency as just something that needs to be done rather than something that supports building equitable teams. So there's a lot of different variables in there.
Okay, and the last point, focusing on the weak areas in cybersecurity and what the potential is of artificial intelligence. Really no surprise on cybersecurity. It was difficult enough beforehand, but now with the air of threat in the world, I think that this is becoming front and center, but even more difficult to achieve just because of the pool of candidates is so small. It's so small. So if we look at the actionable advice, which is the point I thought this slide was the last slide, so excuse me. Obviously focusing on the in-demand skills, and I think we've heard from Kimberley about ensure a razor-sharp focus on the kind of skills you're looking for, but also the bandwidth of allowable skills or transferable skills that you could bring in. Make sure you understand employee financial pressures. I think this is a really difficult one, because promising the earth and then your FD telling you something slightly different is puts you in a really difficult situation. So that's going to be a really difficult balancing act. As we've heard, support employee well-being. Make sure you've got that company direction clearly on both your website, that your managers and your interviewing managers can understand that and verbalize that and discuss it and talk it through in an interview, and don't get found out that actually they've got no interest in that. And that goes hand in hand really with developing that strong employer brand. And that employer brand can be on social media, it can be word of mouth, as we've heard from Kimberley there as well. So that's really important, and I think that comes from understanding and deciding what kind of employer you will be and making that your culture, and focus on recruiting a diverse workforce. It's only going to help your products. Your products will appeal to a more diverse workforce. But again, to a certain extent, hopefully teaching grandma to suck eggs here, because this is the business we are in. But really reiterating that CSR piece, and the authenticity of the actual company and how that works. So we'll wind up the presentation now. We're going to have 5 minutes as usual to kind of answer 19 questions, but so we're not going to get through those. But if you want any more insights and advice, we've just released our Tech Hiring Insider, which drills down further into these areas and others. So please feel free to download that. It went down very well in the first quarter, and we've released the second one for the second half of the year. So have a look at that. But what we will do now is jump over to any questions that have come up in the actual debate. Taz, I know you're working busily in the background. Has anything come through on the questions?
We've got a couple. So the first one is, does the market overall advertise essential services, desirable skills? Thinking about back to Kim's point around the specific skills languages.
Okay, Kimberley, do you get that? Is that?
I'm not sure what the question is.
I'll try and repeat it again, that's fine. Does the market overall advertise essential services that are desirable skills? I can move on to the next one if that's...
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. We'll put that in the file for the LinkedIn Live. Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just not sure the question exactly is.
That's fine. Let's go for the next one.
Sorry.
That's okay. What does the data tell us about the topic of transparency in advertising roles with salary figures included?
Yeah, I can speak from 19 years experience working at Total Jobs Group, and this is always the bugbear. Well, this and not being contacted by an employee that you've applied for. If you can put your salaries on your adverts, you will get, and they are of a competitive range, but not putting the words competitive, actually putting the actual numerical range, you will get more applications. End of story. I don't know, Zoe, have you got any stats on that? I can't remember them offhand, if it's something like a 50% increase or anything like that. Can you remember?
I can't remember it. I can't remember it offhand. But yes, you were absolutely right. Where the salary is visible or even as a second best, that it's there in the background, so that all of the filters, all of the candidate searches are directed to the correct adverts for their salary banding. I want to say it's like 40%, something like that, but maybe we can follow up on the LinkedIn Live with the specific stat around that. What we always see is the complexity, particularly now, I think, with the rising cost of living, of actually, are we paying someone who's coming into the business the same rate that we're paying someone who's in the business, and what tensions does that create for retention, and how big is the bank balance to actually just uplift everybody's salary, which is what a lot of organizations have done. But yes, it's always that challenge, right? Of yes, cost of living is going up for candidates and they need to know the salary. The cost of running a business has also gone up, so there's that tension there. But to take it back to the base question, yes, if you put the salary and it is a competitive range, you will get significantly more and relevant applications.
So on the codebar job board, we actually don't accept any jobs that don't disclose their salary, because my question then, as someone running the charity, but also as a developer, I'll be like, well, why is this information not public? Like, are you hiding something? And also, why do I want to go through the process of applying, probably doing a tech test that are hard, and then also probably a technical interview, to then find out that this salary is below market? And for me, it's just a huge red flag of, if this is not public, then in my head, you're probably not paying people what they deserve. And that's probably not right, but in my head, that's what I'm thinking. And the codebar job board, we don't accept any jobs onto our job board that do not disclose their salary. Because again, why? Why should it not be public? Is there something to hide here?
Actually, you just reminded me, Kimberley, that the confidence index, it came out very clearly that women are more suspicious of adverts that don't have a salary, a numerical salary actually described, than men are. And that's obviously that feeling of, am I going to be taken advantage of financially here when I go in there and they think, well, we've got 2 people, but I reckon I can get away with this. So again, feeds into the DE&I piece. And
the gender pay gap is a thing, right? And so I don't want to find out that I'm paid, even I don't want to find out that I'm paid 5,000 less than the person who's doing exactly the same job with me. And if that's disclosed, I recently heard of a company where they're not allowed to talk about their salaries, like what they're paid, with their employees. And I was like, and apparently they have to sign this in their contract that says they're not allowed to talk about it. And I was like, what? Why are you even working here? It's just, they're all red flags to be like.
I've heard that that's actually illegal anyway. It used to be, oh, you don't do it, and understandably most companies would prefer it, but it's not actually a legal requirement. So not sure how much worth that is. But
I'm glad that I don't actually remember.
I don't think we're not offering legal advice here, are we?
I actually don't remember the company, so they're probably quite thankful of that. I wouldn't have said who they were anyway, but in my head I would have remembered. But actually, I don't remember who they are now, so that's probably quite thankful. But yeah, it's just why?
Thank you very much. We are, as usual, running over time, and there's a bundle of questions. So I'm very, very pleased that we have this other opportunity to LinkedIn Live. It'd be fantastic if Kim and Nimmi could make that, but understandably, given the fact we don't quite know the date yet, that might be impossible. But certainly Zoe and I will try as hard as we can to help people with that. I'd just like to say thank you to Kim, Nimmi, Zoe, the whole backroom crew as well that make these things possible, and most of all, the attendees. Thank you for coming. I hope it's been useful, and that we see you in the future. I'll not quite see you, but you see us, and make some use of this. So thank you very, very much, everybody, and you'll be hearing when we can do this LinkedIn live session in the future. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.